Samantha Carter stood at the bus stop with her duffel bag at her feet and her cane gripped tightly in her right hand. The Montana wind blew her short brown hair across her face as she looked at the town that had once been home. 15 years. In the Marines had changed her, and from the looks of it, Pine Ridge had barely changed at all. The pain in her right leg flared up as she shifted her weight. The doctors had done their best with the shrapnel wounds, but some damage couldn't be fixed. At 37, she had never imagined returning home like this, medically discharged with a Purple Heart, 4 tours behind her, and nothing ahead but uncertainty. Sam? Samantha Carter, is that you? She turned to see a plump woman with graying hair hurrying toward her from the diner across the street. It took Samantha a moment to recognize Betty Johnson, her former next-door neighbor. Mrs. Johnson, Samantha nodded politely. Oh my goodness, look at you, we heard you were coming back. Betty pulled Samantha into a hug that smelled like apple pie and fabric softener. You poor thing with that leg. Come on, I'll drive you to your dad's old place. Samantha wanted to protest that she didn't need help, but the truth was, the 5-mile walk to her inherited house would be painful with her injury. She allowed Betty to help with her bag and followed her to an old blue sedan parked nearby. Town hasn't changed much, Samantha commented as they drove down Main Street. Oh, we got a new traffic light at 3rd and Pine, Betty said proudly. And Paul Miller, you remember Paul from high school? He's our sheriff now, such a nice man. Divorced though, no children. Samantha nodded, recognizing the not-so-subtle hint. Before she left, everyone had expected her to marry Paul. Instead, she had joined the Marines 3 days after graduation, leaving behind small-town expectations and her father's disappointment. Your dad's house has been empty since he passed last year. We've kept an eye on it. The roof needed some work, but George Thompson from the hardware store took care of it. That was kind of him, Samantha said. She had been in a military hospital when her father died. They hadn't spoken in years, but he had still left her the house. Betty pulled up to the small 2-story home with peeling white paint. It looked smaller than Samantha remembered. I'll come by tomorrow with some fresh bread and catch you up on everything, Betty promised, and I'll bring my knitting patterns. It would be good for you to have a hobby, something gentle for your hands after all that fighting. Samantha forced a smile. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Inside, the house smelled musty. Sheets covered the furniture and dust coated every surface. Samantha set her bag down in the entryway and made a slow circuit of the first floor, leaning heavily on her cane. Her father's presence lingered in the worn leather armchair, the collection of fishing lures in the cabinet, the row of books on World War II that he'd read over and over. By evening, she had uncovered the furniture in the living room and kitchen and made up the bed in her old room upstairs. Each trip up the stairs was an exercise in pain management, but she refused to sleep in her father's downstairs bedroom. Not yet. The next morning brought Betty Johnson as promised, along with Sheriff Paul Miller. Look who I ran into at the coffee shop, Betty announced, as if it were a coincidence and not a planned ambush. Paul Miller had filled out since high school, his football player's build now softer around the middle. He wore his sheriff's uniform with the careful pride of someone who had achieved exactly what he wanted in life. Welcome home, Sam, he said, extending his hand. Heard you got banged up pretty bad over there. Samantha shook his hand firmly. I'll live. Betty tells me you're settling in. Anything you need help with around the house? I can manage, Samantha said. She caught the look that passed between Betty and Paul, concern mixed with something else. Doubt, maybe. Or pity. Well, I wanted to talk to you about something, Paul said, removing his hat. We've got an opening at the station, just filing paperwork, answering phones. Nothing exciting, but it's steady work. Might be good for someone. In your condition. In her condition. As if she were terminally ill rather than injured. I appreciate the offer, Samantha said carefully. Let me think about it. After they left, Samantha sat on the porch watching the mountains in the distance. She had grown up in their shadow, learning to hunt with her father before she could properly hold a rifle. By 16, she could outshoot any boy in town. By 25, she had become one of the Marine Corps' top snipers, with reflexes that earned her the nickname Swift Shot among her squad. And now she was home, with people suggesting knitting and desk jobs. The following week brought more visitors, more casseroles, more well-meaning suggestions for what a disabled female veteran might do with herself. The VA office in the next town over offered basic medical care and a support group that met once a month. The caseworker suggested pottery classes. Many veterans find working with their hands therapeutic, he explained, not looking up from his computer. Something creative rather than destructive. Samantha did not tell him that her hands had been plenty creative in the field, creating solutions, creating safe passages for her team, creating chances for civilians to escape. She simply took the pamphlets and added them to the growing pile, at home. At night she often sat cleaning her hunting rifle, the one possession of her father's that she truly wanted. The familiar motions brought comfort, even as pain radiated through her damaged leg. She wasn't cleared to drive yet, but she promised herself that when she was, she would head to the mountains, away from the concerned looks and helpful suggestions. It was 3 weeks after her return when she first saw the lights. She was sitting on the porch late at night, unable to sleep due to pain and the dreams that came with it. In the clear night sky above the distant mountains, a pattern of lights moved in a way no aircraft should move, stopping suddenly, changing direction at impossible angles, then hovering motionless. Samantha watched for nearly 10 minutes as the lights performed their strange dance, then suddenly shot upward and vanished. The next morning she asked Betty if there was a military base nearby that might be testing new aircraft. Heavens, no, Betty said, arranging yarn in her basket. Though, Mrs. Gunderson said she saw strange lights last month while walking her dog. The paper said it was probably weather balloons or some atmospheric thing. Now I brought you 3 different knitting patterns. The scarf is easiest for beginners. Samantha thanked her and placed the patterns on the growing pile of helpful suggestions. That evening, she turned on the local news and watched a segment about unusual lights reported over the mountains. The meteorologist explained it away as reflections from a nearby city's light pollution. Though Samantha knew the nearest city was over 100 miles away, something wasn't right. And for the first time since coming home, Samantha felt a familiar sensation stirring inside her, the focused alertness that had kept her and her team alive in hostile territory. Her instincts were trying to tell her something. That night she cleaned her rifle again, checked the scope, and made a decision. As soon as she was cleared to drive, she would go to the mountains and see for herself what was happening up there. Everyone in town might think she needed knitting to occupy her hands, but Samantha Carter knew what her hands were truly good for, and it wasn't making scarves. The doctor cleared Samantha to drive 6 weeks after her return to Pine Ridge. The next morning she was up before sunrise, packing a small backpack with water, protein bars, a first aid kit, and binoculars. She strapped a hunting knife to her belt and tucked her father's old flip phone into her pocket. Her own smartphone went into a side pocket of the backpack. The drive to Black Rock Trail took 40 minutes. Samantha parked her father's old truck at the nearly empty trailhead lot. Only one other vehicle was there, a battered green Jeep she recognized as belonging to Ben Walsh, the local forest ranger. She hoped to avoid him. Ben had been 2 years ahead of her in school and had always treated her like a kid sister. The trail started gently enough, but soon began to climb. Samantha set a careful pace, her cane helping her navigate the uneven ground. Her leg protested, with each step, but she pushed through the pain. In the Marines, she had learned to compartmentalize discomfort, to acknowledge it without letting it stop her. After an hour of steady hiking, Samantha reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley below and the higher peaks beyond. She settled on a flat rock, pulled out her binoculars, and began a systematic scan of the area where she had seen the lights. Nothing seemed out of place, just pine forests, rocky outcroppings, and the occasional movement of wildlife. She was about to move on when something caught her eye, a flash of metal where no metal should be. Adjusting the focus on her binoculars, Samantha studied the spot. There, partially hidden among the trees on a distant slope, was what looked like a smooth, metallic surface that didn't belong in the natural landscape. Samantha checked her position on the trail map, calculated the distance to the strange object, and plotted a route that would take her closer while keeping her concealed. It would mean going off trail, but she was confident in her navigation skills. The journey took longer than expected. Twice, she had to stop and rest her leg. By midday, she had worked her way around to a dense stand of pines that offered a better view of her target. What she saw through her binoculars made her breath catch. Half hidden in a natural depression was a craft unlike anything she had ever seen. It was roughly oval, with a metallic surface that seemed to shift colors slightly as clouds passed overhead. No markings, no visible windows or doors, just a smooth shell about the size of a small bus. Samantha carefully took photos with her smartphone, zooming in as much as the camera would allow. As she was taking the last shot, movement near the craft caught her attention. At first, she thought it was a trick of light and shadow, but then she saw it clearly. A tall, thin figure moving with an odd, jerky grace. The figure stepped into full view, and Samantha had to clamp a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. It was not human. The creature stood at least 7 feet tall with a body structure that reminded her of a praying mantis, though it walked upright on 2 legs. Its skin, or exoskeleton, had a greenish-brown coloration that would blend well with the forest. The head was elongated with large compound eyes. The alien, because what else could it be, carried something in its multi-jointed arms. It appeared to be taking samples from plants and soil, placing them in containers attached to a belt around its narrow waist. Samantha watched, barely breathing, as a second creature emerged from the craft. This one carried what was unmistakably a weapon, something like a rifle but with an organic, curved design. The armed alien made a sweeping motion with its free arm, and the first creature moved to a different area to continue collecting samples. Carefully, Samantha shifted position to get a better angle for more photos. As she moved, her cane slipped, on the pine needles covering the ground. She caught herself before falling, but the cane struck a rock with a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet forest. Both aliens froze. The armed one made a series of clicking sounds and pointed toward Samantha's hiding place. She remained perfectly still, using the camouflage techniques that had kept her alive in combat zones. But these weren't human enemies with human senses. The armed alien began moving in her direction, its movements now more fluid and predatory. Samantha weighed her options. She had her hunting knife, but no firearm. Running was impossible with her injured leg. Her best chance was to stay hidden and hope the alien would pass by without spotting her. It didn't. The creature paused about 20 feet from her position, its large eyes scanning the trees. Then, with shocking speed, it raised its weapon and fired. A pulse of energy hit the tree beside Samantha, leaving a scorched hole in the trunk. Training took over. Samantha rolled away from her hiding spot as a second energy pulse struck where she had been moments before. She came up in a crouch, ignoring the pain shooting through her leg, and pulled her hunting knife from its sheath. The alien advanced, weapon raised. Samantha waited until it was 10 feet away, then flung a handful of dirt and pine needles toward its large eyes. The creature made a high-pitched shrieking sound and fired wildly. Samantha dodged and closed the distance, driving her knife toward a gap in the exoskeleton, where she had noticed a more vulnerable-looking connection between segments. The xiao blade struck true, sinking into what must have been soft tissue. A greenish fluid spurted from the wound. The alien made another shrieking sound and struck out with its free arm, catching Samantha across the chest and sending her flying backward. She hit the ground hard, the impact jarring her injured leg and driving the breath from her lungs. The alien was wounded but still coming. It raised its weapon again. Samantha's hand closed around her cane. As the alien fired, she rolled again and came up swinging the cane like a club. It connected with the wounded area, causing the creature to stagger. Before it could recover, Samantha struck again, this time aiming for what passed for its head. The alien went down, its weapon falling from its grasp. Samantha lunged for the strange rifle, but before she could reach it, a sound from behind made her turn. The second alien was rushing toward her, carrying a different kind of device that emitted a high-pitched whine. Samantha knew she couldn't win this fight. She grabbed her backpack and smartphone and ran as best she could, using trees and rocks for cover as energy pulses blasted around her. Her leg screamed in protest, but fear and adrenaline kept her moving. She lost track of how long she ran, taking a winding path down the mountain that she hoped would confuse her pursuer. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded. Samantha found a small cave formed by fallen boulders and crawled inside, collapsing in exhaustion. When she finally caught her breath and checked her phone, she was surprised to find she still had signal. The photos were there, blurry, but clear, enough to show the craft and one of the aliens in the distance. She had evidence, but who would believe her? Samantha thought of Sheriff Paul Miller and his condescending offer of a desk job, of Betty Johnson and her knitting patterns, of the VA counselor who suggested pottery for her condition. None of them would take her seriously. They would say the photos were faked or misidentified. They would blame her PTSD or her pain medication. They would pat her hand and suggest more gentle hobbies to occupy her troubled mind. But Samantha knew what she had seen. Aliens were here, studying Earth, collecting samples, and based on the armed guard, their intentions were not peaceful. Someone had to believe her. Someone had to help her warn others. As the sun began to set, Samantha made her way carefully back, to the trail and then to her truck. Her leg throbbed with each step, and she had bruises forming from her fight with the alien. But she was alive, and she had evidence. Now she just needed to find someone who would listen. Samantha drove back to Pine Ridge with her heart pounding and her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The encounter with the aliens kept replaying in her mind. Those weren't weather balloons or atmospheric phenomena. Those were intelligent beings, with advanced technology and weapons. When she reached town, she drove straight to the sheriff's office. Paul Miller was at his desk looking bored as he filled out paperwork. He glanced up in surprise when Samantha limped in, her clothes dirty and torn, a fresh bruise forming on her cheek. "Sam, what happened to you?" He stood up quickly. "I need to show you something." Samantha pulled out her phone and opened the photos. "I was hiking in the mountains and found these." Paul took the phone and frowned at the images. "What am I looking at?" "A spacecraft and aliens. They're collecting samples, studying our environment." Samantha pointed to a blurry shape in one photo. "That's one of them. They're about 7 feet tall with a body like a praying mantis. They have weapons, Paul." "Energy weapons." Paul's expression changed from concern to skepticism. "Sam, these could be anything. Weird rock formations, shadows, maybe some campers with gear." "I fought with one of them," Samantha insisted. "It shot at me with some kind of energy pulse. I stabbed it with my hunting knife." Now Paul looked truly worried, but not in the way Samantha had hoped. "Have you been taking your pain medication properly? Sometimes those drugs can cause hallucinations, especially combined with stress and PTSD." "This wasn't a hallucination." Samantha's voice rose. "I know what I saw." "Okay, calm down." Paul handed the phone back. "Look, why don't I take you over to see Dr. Williams? He can check you out. Make sure you didn't re-injure your leg." "I don't need a doctor. I need someone to listen to me." Samantha slammed her hand on the desk. "There are aliens in our mountains planning something, and nobody is doing anything about it." The door to the small station opened, and Betty Johnson walked in with a casserole dish. She stopped short at the sight of Samantha's disheveled appearance. "Samantha Carter, what on earth happened to you?" "She was hiking and had a fall," Paul said quickly. "Betty, can you take her over to Dr. Williams while I finish up here? I'll stop by later to check on her." "Of course. Come on, Sam. Let's get you looked at." Samantha wanted to protest but saw the look in Paul's eyes. He thought she was having some kind of breakdown. Arguing more would only reinforce that idea. She allowed Betty to lead her out to her car. At the small medical clinic, Dr. Frank Williams examined Samantha's leg and the new bruises on her body. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face and gentle hands. "The leg doesn't seem to have any new damage, just irritation from overexertion," he said. "The bruising is consistent with a fall. I'm going to give you something to help you rest." "I don't need rest," Samantha said. "I need people to believe me." Dr. Williams exchanged a look with Betty, who was hovering nearby. "Believe you about what?" "She thinks she saw aliens in the mountains," Betty whispered, but not quietly enough. Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. Samantha, it's not uncommon for veterans to experience vivid flashbacks or even hallucinations, especially after trauma. Your brain is trying to process everything you've been through. This wasn't a flashback, Samantha insisted, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. No one was going to believe her. Not in this town. Dr. Williams wrote a prescription and handed it to her. This will help with the anxiety. I want you to take it easy for a few days. No more hiking until your leg has had more time to heal. Samantha took the prescription without looking at it. What was the point in arguing? She let Betty drive her home, half listening to the older woman's concerned chatter. You need something to occupy your mind, Betty said as she helped Samantha into the house. Something peaceful. I'll bring over those knitting supplies tomorrow. After Betty left, Samantha sat on the porch, staring at the mountains in the distance. The aliens were out there, perhaps planning something dangerous, and she was stuck here with people who thought she was losing her mind. The next morning, Samantha woke to the sound of someone knocking at her door. She expected it to be Betty, with knitting needles, but instead found George Thompson, the owner of the local gun range and hardware store. He was a tall, lean man in his 60s with a weathered face and sharp eyes. Morning, Samantha, he said. Heard you had some trouble up in the mountains yesterday. News travels fast, Samantha said, stepping aside to let him in. Small town. George set a paper bag on the kitchen table. Brought you some coffee and donuts. Thought you might need it after your adventure. Samantha eyed him warily. Did Paul send you to check on the crazy lady? George chuckled. No, I came because I want to hear about what you really saw up there. Not the version you told Paul, and not the version he's telling everyone else. Samantha studied his face, looking for signs of mockery or concern. Instead, she saw genuine interest in something else, understanding. Why do you care what I saw? George took a seat at the table and motioned for Samantha to join him. Because I've been watching those lights for months. Because strange things have been happening around here that nobody wants to talk about. And because 20 years in military intelligence taught me to pay attention when things don't add up. Samantha sat down slowly. You were intelligence? Army. Retired 10 years ago and came back to my hometown to run the family business. People around here think I'm just an old man who likes guns and fishing. He smiled slightly. That suits me fine. For the first time since returning to Pine Ridge, Samantha felt a spark of hope. I have photos, but they're not very clear. Let's see them. She showed him the images on her phone. George studied them carefully, zooming in on different parts. What happened when they spotted you? He asked. Samantha described the encounter in detail. The alien's movement, the weapon, the fight. George listened without interrupting, his expression serious. You were lucky to get away, he said when she finished. Very lucky. You believe me? I believe you saw something that wasn't supposed to be seen. He handed the phone back. The question is, what are they doing here? Exploration, invasion, preparation, resource assessment? You talk like you've dealt with this before, Samantha said. George's eyes met hers. Let's just say this isn't the first report of non-human visitors that I've come across. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the mountains. I have a private shooting range behind my property away from the store, more advanced than what people around here need for hunting deer. If you're interested, I could use someone with your skills to help me investigate this further. My skills? Samantha asked. I can barely walk without a cane. I'm not talking about your ability to hike, Samantha. I'm talking about your ability to assess threats, to track, to shoot. He turned to face her. You were a sniper, one of the best from what I've heard. That's not something you lose because of a leg injury. Samantha felt something stir inside her. Purpose, determination, the feeling of being valued for what she could do, rather than pitied for what she couldn't. What's your plan? First, we need to confirm what we're dealing with. Then we need evidence that even Paul Miller can't dismiss. And we need to figure out what they're planning. George smiled grimly. Are you in? Samantha stood up, her decision made. I'm in, but I'll need a better weapon than a hunting knife. I think I can help with that, George said. Meet me at my range tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. As George left, Betty Johnson pulled up in her car, a basket of yarn visible in the passenger seat. Samantha watched as the two exchanged greetings on the front walk. Bringing Samantha some knitting supplies, Betty explained cheerfully. The poor dear needs something to keep her hands busy. That's thoughtful of you, Betty, George said, winking at Samantha over the older woman's head. I'm sure Sam appreciates it. Samantha smiled to herself. Let Betty bring her yarn. Her hands would soon be busy with something far more important than knitting. The next morning, Samantha drove to George's property on the outskirts of town. His house stood at the front with the hardware store attached to one side. Behind stretched several acres of land that backed up against the foothills. George met her at the door wearing cargo pants and a faded army t-shirt. Come around back, he said, leading her through the house and out the rear door. They walked past a vegetable garden and a small workshop to a clearing surrounded by tall earthen berms. At the far end stood metal targets of various sizes. Private range, George explained. The town range is for hunters and hobbyists. This is where I keep my skills sharp. He unlocked a heavy door built into the side of a hill, a bunker of some kind. Inside, motion sensor lights revealed a clean, organized space lined with gun safes, workbenches, and equipment racks. Army pension doesn't pay for all this, Samantha observed. George shrugged. Family money. My grandfather struck oil on his farm in Texas. Left me enough to indulge my interests. He opened one of the safes and removed a sleek rifle with a sophisticated scope. Barrett M82A1, semi-automatic .50 caliber, effective range of around 1,800 meters. Samantha ran her fingers along the barrel. Not exactly for hunting deer. No, George agreed. This is for situations where you need to be very far away from whatever you're shooting at. He handed her the rifle. It was heavy, but the weight felt good in her hands. Familiar. Right. Let's see what you can do, George said, nodding toward the targets. Samantha moved to the firing position, a raised platform, with a padded rest. She settled the rifle against her shoulder, adjusting her stance to compensate for her injured leg. Looking through the scope, she focused on the farthest target, a small metal plate about the size of a dinner plate. Wind from the west. About 5 miles per hour, George said. Distance to target is 800 meters. Samantha made the necessary adjustments, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the metal plate swing backward as the bullet struck at dead center. Nice shot, George said. Try the moving targets. He pressed a button on a remote control, and several targets began to move on tracks, swinging from side to side at different speeds. Samantha took her time, tracking each one, then fired 5 shots in rapid succession. Each bullet found its mark. They don't call you swift shot for nothing, George said with approval. One more test. He set up a row of 10 small targets at varying distances. Hit all of these as fast as you can. Samantha settled into position again, took a deep breath, and began firing. 10 shots, 10 hits, all in under 10 seconds. George nodded, clearly impressed. Your skills are intact. How's the leg holding up? Hurts, Samantha admitted. But I can work through it. Good. Because we have work to do. George led her back to the bunker and pulled out a map of the surrounding mountains. I've marked the locations where I've observed unusual activity. Your encounter adds another data point. Samantha studied the map. They're establishing a perimeter. These positions give them sight lines to the town and the main roads. That's what I thought too. But why Pine Ridge? We're not exactly a strategic location. Maybe it's not about the town. Maybe it's about something in the mountains. George considered this. There's an old silver mine about 15 miles north. It was abandoned in the 60s when the vein ran out. But maybe they found something else there. We need to check it out, Samantha said. Tomorrow. Today I want to make sure you're comfortable with the equipment we'll be using. They spent the rest of the morning practicing with various weapons and reviewing tactical approaches. George, Had an impressive collection of gear, including night vision goggles, communication devices, and body armor. Expecting a war? Samantha asked as she tried on a lightweight tactical vest. Always best to be prepared. George checked his watch. Let's break for lunch. I've got sandwiches in the fridge. As they walked back to the house, they heard a car pulling up the front drive. George frowned. Not expecting anyone. They went through the house to find Sheriff Paul Miller getting out of his patrol car. He noticed Samantha and raised his eyebrows. Morning, George, Paul said. Sam, didn't expect to see you here. Samantha's helping me test some new hunting equipment, George said smoothly. What brings you by? Got a report about Andy Peters. He went fishing up near Black Rock Lake yesterday and never came home. His wife is worried sick. That's near where I was hiking, Samantha said. Paul gave her a look. Yes, well, I've got search parties heading out this afternoon. Could use some experienced eyes, George, if you're willing. Of course, George said. Samantha and I will both help. Paul hesitated. You sure that's a good idea? With her leg and all? I can manage, Samantha said firmly. All right, we're meeting at the ranger station at 2. Paul got back in his car, then paused. Oh, and Sam, Dr. Williams called. Said you didn't pick up your prescription. He's concerned. I'm fine, Samantha said. After Paul drove away, George turned to Samantha. This changes things. If these creatures are taking people, we need to move faster. We don't know that's what happened to Andy, Samantha cautioned. Maybe not, but it's a hell of a coincidence. George went to a desk in the corner and pulled out a small device that looked like a cell phone. This is a thermal imaging camera. Clips right to your phone. If those things are out there, this will help us spot them. The search for Andy Peters began with 20 people gathered at the ranger station. They were divided into teams of 2, each assigned a section of the mountainside, to search. Samantha and George were given an area near where she had encountered the aliens, though she hadn't shared that detail with the search coordinator. As they hiked up the trail, George kept a careful pace that allowed for Samantha's injury. We're not really looking for Andy, are we? She asked. We are, but we're also looking for evidence of your friends from the other day. 2 birds, 1 stone. They searched their assigned area thoroughly, calling Andy's name and looking for signs of his passage. By late afternoon, they had found nothing and were about to turn back when Samantha's phone buzzed. It was a group text to all searchers. Andy's fishing gear had been found by the lake, but there was no sign of the man himself. That's strange, George said. If he was attacked by an animal, there would be signs. Blood, torn clothing. Unless he was taken, Samantha said quietly. George nodded. Let's go to the lake, see what they found. By the time they reached the lake, several other search teams had gathered. Andy's fishing rod was propped against a rock, his tackle box open beside it. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a flat stone, and his truck was parked nearby. It's like he just vanished, one of the searchers said. Sheriff Miller was taking notes and looking worried. We'll expand the search tomorrow. Bring in dogs. Maybe he fell and is lying injured somewhere. Samantha walked to the edge of the lake and looked across the water toward the mountains beyond. Something caught her eye, a flash of movement on the far shore. She pulled out her phone and attached the thermal camera George had given her. Through the viewfinder, she could see a heat signature moving among the trees. It was too tall and thin to be human. George, she said quietly. Look at this. He came to stand beside her and took the phone. His expression darkened. We need to get these people out of here now. Before they could warn the others, a scream came from the trees behind them. Everyone turned to see one of the searchers, a young woman named Diane Martinez, backing away from something in the forest. As they watched, a tall, insectoid figure emerged from the shadows, pointing a weapon at Diane. What the hell is that? Sheriff Miller shouted, drawing his service pistol. Get down! Samantha yelled, tackling Diane to the ground as the alien fired. The energy pulse hit a tree, setting it ablaze instantly. Chaos erupted. People ran in all directions as more aliens emerged from the trees. George pulled his own weapon, a compact submachine gun that Samantha hadn't known he was carrying, and fired at the closest creature. The bullet seemed to bounce off its exoskeleton, but the impact drove it backward. "Head for the trucks!" George shouted to the panicking searchers. "Go!" Samantha helped Diane to her feet and pushed her toward the parking area. Then she turned, back to face the aliens, wishing she had the Barrett rifle with her. Sheriff Miller was firing his pistol at another alien, his shots having little effect. "Paul!" Samantha called. "Aim for the joints, the connections between the segments." Paul adjusted his aim and fired again. This time the alien staggered as a bullet found a vulnerable spot. Green fluid spurted from the wound. Samantha grabbed a heavy rock and hurled it at another approaching alien, buying time for more searchers to escape. The creature turned its attention to her, raising its weapon. George appeared at her side, firing his gun in controlled bursts. "Time to go, Swift." "Shot." Together they backed toward the parking area, providing covering fire as the last of the searchers fled. The aliens were regrouping, more of them emerging from the trees across the lake. "This is just a scouting party," George said grimly as they reached his truck. "The real invasion hasn't even started yet." As they drove away, Samantha looked back to see the aliens gathered at the edge of the lake, watching the humans retreat. One raised what looked like a communication device to the side of its head. It was calling for reinforcements. Back in town, chaos reigned at the sheriff's office. People who had been part of the search party were talking over each other, trying to describe what they had seen. Sheriff Miller looked overwhelmed. "Everybody calm down," he shouted. "One at a time." Diane Martinez, the young mechanic who had first spotted the alien, spoke up. It was like a giant insect walking on two legs. It had some kind of weapon that shot fire or energy. "I saw at least 5 of them," another searcher added. "They came out of nowhere." Sheriff Miller ran a hand through his hair. "I've called the state police. They're sending officers. I've also contacted the FBI." "The FBI won't get here in time," George said, stepping forward. "Those things were calling for backup. I think they're planning something big and soon." "What makes you the expert, Thompson?" Paul asked. 20 years military intelligence, and I'm not the only one with relevant experience." George nodded toward Samantha. "Carter here was a Marine sniper. 4 tours. She knows what an enemy force looks like when it's preparing to attack." All eyes turned to Samantha. She stood straighter, ignoring the pain in her leg. "What they've been doing, the lights, the sample collection, the surveillance, it's textbook pre-invasion reconnaissance. They're learning our terrain, our weaknesses, maybe our biology. The fact that they took, Andy suggests they're studying humans directly now." "So what do we do?" someone asked. "We need to find their base," Samantha said. "George and I think it might be near the old silver mine. If we can locate their main ship or communication equipment, maybe we can stop them from calling in their main force." There was a long pause. Then Sheriff Miller nodded slowly. "I still have trouble believing we're talking about actual aliens, but I saw those things with my own eyes. And they took Andy." He turned to Samantha. "What's your plan?" "We need a small team. Fast, quiet, well-armed. We go in tonight, locate their base, gather evidence of their plans, and if possible, disrupt their communications." "I'm in," Diane said immediately. "I'm good with machines. If we find their tech, I might be able to figure it out." "Me too," said Kevin Franklin, the high school science teacher. "I've studied xenobiology as a hobby for years. Never thought it would be useful." "I should come as well," said a new voice from the doorway. Lisa Winters, the nurse practitioner who had been helping with Samantha's physical therapy, stepped into the room. "If there are injuries, you'll need medical support." Sheriff Miller looked at the volunteers and sighed. "I can't officially sanction this, but I'll come too, and bring whatever firepower the department has." "That settles it," George said. "Everyone, meet at my place in 1 hour. Bring warm clothes, food, water, and any special equipment you might have. Samantha and I will supply the weapons." An hour later, the small team gathered at George's house. He led them to his bunker, where he distributed rifles, pistols, and tactical gear. "The bullets won't penetrate their outer shell," Samantha explained as she checked her Barrett rifle. "Aim for the joints, the connections between segments. That's their weak spot. What about their weapons? Lisa asked, looking uncomfortable, as she accepted a pistol. Stay out of their line of fire, George said simply. If you see them aim, drop to the ground immediately. They piled into 2 vehicles, George's truck and Sheriff Miller's SUV, and headed toward the mountains. Night had fallen, and the roads were empty. They drove with dimmed lights, not wanting to announce their approach. At the base of the trail, leading to the old mine, they parked and continued on foot. Samantha's leg ached, but she pushed through the pain, leading the way with George. They moved slowly, using night vision goggles to navigate the dark path. About a mile from the mine entrance, Samantha signaled for everyone to stop. Through her goggles, she could see heat signatures ahead. Several alien figures moving around what appeared to be a much larger spacecraft than the one she had seen earlier. There's their base, she whispered. I count at least a dozen of them. Outside, probably more inside. What's the plan? Sheriff Miller asked. We need to get closer, see what they're doing, George said. Samantha and I will go ahead. The rest of you stay here. If we're not back in 30 minutes, head back to town and warn everyone. Samantha and George moved forward carefully, keeping to the shadows. As they got closer, they could see that the aliens were loading equipment into the ship. At the center of their camp stood a tall structure, a communication array of some kind, with a dish pointed toward the sky. That's how they're calling their invasion force, George whispered. We need to disable it. They watched as an alien emerged from the ship carrying something that made Samantha's blood run cold. It was Andy Peters, unconscious and strapped to some kind of examination table. Behind him came another alien with strange instruments. They're experimenting on him, Samantha said. We need to move now. They crawled back to where the others waited and quickly explained what they had seen. We need to create a diversion, George said. Draw some of them away from the camp, then a small team can sneak in and disable that communication array. I can create a diversion, Sheriff Miller offered. Set off some flashbangs in the woods, to the east. Make them think there's a larger force. I'll go with you, Kevin said. 2 positions will make it more convincing. Diane, you come with us to the array, Samantha said. We'll need your mechanical skills. Lisa, stay at the edge of the camp. If we get Andy out, he'll need immediate medical attention. They split into their teams and moved into position. Samantha, George, and Diane worked their way to a ridge overlooking the alien camp, where Samantha set up her rifle. From this vantage point, she had a clear shot at the communication array. When the diversion starts, I'll take out any guards near the array, she said. George, you and Diane run in and disable it. I'll cover you. They didn't have to wait long. Suddenly, multiple flashbangs exploded in the woods east of the camp. The aliens reacted immediately, several of them moving toward the disturbance with weapons raised. Now, Samantha said. Through her scope, she tracked an alien guard approaching the communication array. She took a deep breath, adjusted for wind, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as the bullet found its mark, the joint where the alien's head connected to its body. The creature dropped. She quickly shifted to another guard, fired again, and took it down as well. George and Diane were already moving, sprinting toward the array. Samantha provided covering fire, shooting 2 more aliens that tried to intercept them. George reached the array and provided cover while Diane examined the equipment. Samantha could see her working quickly, removing panels, disconnecting components. But more aliens were coming, alerted by the gunfire. Samantha fired repeatedly, each bullet finding a vulnerable spot on an alien body. 10 shots, 10 hits. Just like at the practice range, but they were running out of time. Hurry, she called to Diane over the radio. Almost got it, Diane replied. There's a power source here that, yes. The dish on top of the array suddenly went dark, its lights fading. At the same moment, an alarm sounded from the alien ship. They had been discovered. Fall back, George ordered. Everyone, head for the extraction point. Samantha kept firing, covering their retreat as George and Diane ran from the disabled array. But they had another problem. Andy was still in the alien camp. We can't leave him, she said into the radio. I'm on it, came Sheriff Miller's voice. Through her scope, Samantha saw him approaching the examination table from the side, using the confusion to his advantage. He reached Andy and began unfastening the restraints. An alien spotted him and raised its weapon. Samantha fired, her bullet striking the creature's arm joint. It dropped the weapon with a shriek. Miller got Andy free and began dragging him toward the trees. "Covering fire," Samantha called to George, who had reached her position. Together, they fired at any alien that moved toward Miller and Andy. Lisa met them at the edge of the clearing, quickly checking Andy's condition. "He's alive but sedated. We need to move now." The team retreated down the mountain, firing to keep the aliens at bay. Behind them, the alien ship's engines were powering up, lights flashing around its hull. "They're leaving," Kevin said as they reached the vehicles. "Or regrouping," George countered. "Without their communication array, they can't call for backup. But they're not giving up." They drove back to town at top speed. As they crested the last hill before Pine Ridge, they saw headlights approaching. Many of them. "Government vehicles," George said, recognizing the pattern. "Looks like the FBI finally showed up." The convoy stopped, and a woman stepped out of the lead SUV. She wore a dark suit and had the bearing of someone used to command. "Colonel Laura Baker, Military Intelligence," she said, showing identification. "George Thompson, you old dog. Your message finally reached the right ears." "About time," George replied. "We've got wounded, and we've got a story you're going to find hard to believe." Colonel Baker looked at the team, her eyes stopping on Samantha and the Barrett rifle. "Marine Sergeant Samantha Carter, correct? Swift shot herself." Samantha straightened. "Yes, ma'am. Your reputation precedes you." Baker smiled slightly. "I think we'll believe your story just fine. Now brief me on what we're facing." As dawn broke over Pine Ridge, military vehicles filled the streets. Soldiers established checkpoints while scientists examined.